Through my lens, President Putin brought a chaotic and failed nation to become a vibrant, creative, economic force within a decade. Let's start today's today's dialogue, today's political conversation with Tara Reade. So Tara Reade's been in the news because she defected to Russia. We talked about it on Tuesday's stream. It's very strange that she defected to Russia. I mean, it's not incredibly strange if you know the history of Tara Reade, which a lot of people don't know, but I'll get into that in a moment. But she defected to Russia, and the reason she gave is because she says she is no longer safe in the United States, that she no longer feels safe, and that she was texted by right-wing congressman, I would say far-right congressman, depending on your perspective, Matt Gaetz, who texted her and told her that he could not keep her safe. And so Tara Reade then made the decision that she would flee to Russia because she no longer felt safe in the United States. Why she doesn't feel safe? Well, Tara Reade made an accusation against Joe Biden that he sexually assaulted her. Now, has any evidence ever been presented for this claim? No. Her story also continues to change, and she's also quite a strange character with kind of like some weird alignment with the Uruhu movement, which I don't want to get into, but you guys can look into yourself online and the people who are facing criminal charges around that. She has been at Russian-related, like pro-Russian events in Russian. She has a relationship with many Russian government figures, including former FSB agents. Which actually in this interview, she was talking about her relationship with a former FSB agent. She has been very accusatory towards Ukraine during this war. She spoke at the Rage Against the War Machine rally. So she has a history of being along the fringe of politics, as well as being weirdly aligned with the Russian government for this invasion and beforehand. And I could talk at length about her story changing along with the accusation, the lack of evidence. I could talk about how crazy this is, but I already did a segment going through a decent portion of her press conference with Russian state TV, talking about why she defected to Russia. But what I realized when I looked around is a lot of people don't know that this isn't the first time before this invasion. This is the first time she's been very supportive of the Russian government. She was supportive of the Russian government before this invasion. And then I thought, actually, I don't know a lot about that either. I know that she was supportive of Vladimir Putin beforehand. I heard that she wrote an article back in the day supporting Vladimir Putin. So I decided I would look for that article, and I found that she had deleted the article. The article no longer exists. And I was like, oh, that's strange. Why did she delete the article after, now defecting to Russia? It's not like she's now, I'm critical of the Russian government. I'm very critical of she just defected to Russia after, praising the Russian government for keeping her safe and trying to downplay the invasion and justify it. So why did she delete it? And after unlocking it and reading the first two sentences using the Wayback Machine, I found out why. And I didn't read all of it. I only read the first two sentences, and immediately I knew why she deleted this article. So I got the article, and we're going to read it. Also, one last thing. I wanted to talk about reactions like this from Savvy Sabs and Nico House to Tara Reade fleeing the country, quote unquote, fleeing the country. Tara Reade had to leave the country to feel safe. Let that sink in. Is that a permanent change? She's seeking citizenship. Wow. How sad. Sad. I know she's really going to miss all of her horses. The only threat she actually identified in the interview was threats online. She said that in her email or in somewhere, she didn't even specify where, she got vague threats. She didn't give any more information, said nothing else. And that's enough for you to buy it. Okay, whatever. Anyway, let's read the article. Let's read the article that really put me on its ass. Put me on my ass just after reading two sentences. So let's read it, okay? So, let's start with the title. Why a liberal Democrat supports Vladimir Putin. Oh boy. Why would a liberal, somebody who believes in, a liberal Democrat, somebody who's a liberal, believes in freedom of the press? If you're a liberal, you're supposed to believe in something like that. You're supposed to believe in, free and fair elections. You're supposed to believe in a strong judicial system, and having a fair trials for people. You're supposed to, hypothetically, not all liberal governments have been like this, but are supposed to believe in not killing your political opponents. These are all things that, you know, liberals are supposed to believe. They believe a bunch of other stuff as well, but these are all things they're supposed to believe. How can you, like Vladimir Putin, somebody who is staunchly anti-liberal and hates liberal internationalist institutions around the world? Let's check it out. This was written in 2018, by the way, so this isn't even that long ago. So this was after the Russian invasion of Georgia. This was after the Russian invasion of Crimea. This is after the 2 wars in Chechnya. This is after Russia's already engaged in a lot of its aggressive geopolitics around the world. Let's read let's read the first 2 sentences, the sentences that set me on my ass. Somewhere between ideas of right and wrong, there is a garden. I will meet you there. Why would a liberal Democrat support Vladimir Putin? Maybe it is because I believe he has saved the world. He has saved the world from a large conflict on more than one occasion. Maybe it is because he speaks reasonably with emotional intelligence at diplomatic meetings. Maybe it is because I worked in the government and came to know the American international agenda. Stay with me, as it is even more than that. Okay, so first off, she worked as an aide for Biden for like 1 or 2 years. That does not mean that you now know the American international agenda, okay? I advised like some congressional campaigns, very low-level congressional campaigns on foreign policy. That does not mean that I now deeply understand the American international agenda, just doing something as small as that. And even that's more related to foreign policy than being an aide. So I don't know where she got this deep knowledge of American international agenda or how she got that from her time in government. Anyway, let's read more into these other parts though. I believed he saved the world from a large conflict on more than one occasion. Now, this is of course ironic, given the fact that Russia has now invaded all of Ukraine and is engaged in the largest war and started the largest war in Europe since World War II. And I do want to push that. It's the largest war in Europe since World War II. He started that. Hundreds of thousands of people are dead. Tons are injured. People are displaced from their homes. And the populations that Vladimir Putin invaded, in his word, to protect the Russian speakers of the Donbass, are dying in the highest numbers from Russian bombs. So there's a level of irony there that is obvious, and I don't want to dig too deep into. But at this point, Russia had already fought 2 wars in Chechnya. Russia had already invaded Georgia, and Russia had already invaded Crimea. After the whole time in 2014, Vladimir Putin was claiming publicly that they weren't invading Crimea. And then once they were done, they finally admitted, oh, they invaded Crimea. They then said they didn't have troops in the Donbass until in 2015, you know, their troops were captured. And then they had to admit, yes, we have something in the Donbass, but I don't want to get into specifics. In 2022, this is of course after she wrote the article, we saw the same type of, I guess, footsie under the table when it comes to the Russian invasion, with them denying they were going to do it the whole time. In 2008, Vladimir Putin said there was no ethnic issue in Crimea and that there was no ethnic issue in Ukraine. He said this in 2008. This is the same year, 2008, that NATO and Ukraine had a meeting where they then declared to the world that one of the eventual goals of the NATO alliance is to have NATO in. And that is also an aspiration of Ukraine. That is the same year when that happened. That is the same year he said there is no ethnic issue. He was saying this in the fallout of the Russian invasion of Georgia, that there was no ethnic problem, in order to deviate from the idea that he would invade Ukraine in the future, because everybody was scared after the Russian invasion of Georgia. Will he next invade Ukraine? Vladimir Putin tried to convince the world that that was not the case. Obviously, as history has gone on, that has turned out to be the case. So if you go through the history of Vladimir Putin, the history of his administration, the idea that he saved the world from large conflicts on more than one occasion, when he started multiple large conflicts. In fact, sometimes it's not even the Russians are purposely starting large conflicts. It's that their incompetence is contributing to large conflicts around the world as well. An example of this would be Armenia and Azerbaijan, where Armenia is no longer able to count on the Russians to back them up upon an Azerbaijani invasion, because when they tried to use a defensive treaty with Russia, once Azerbaijan invaded and attacked Armenia proper, Russia basically rejected it, but then they sent some peacekeepers. Why are they not so supportive of Armenia? They're vaguely supportive of Armenia, but why aren't they sending troops and all the stuff that would be promised to them in the alliance structure? Because they can't. They can't engage in a war with Armenia against Azerbaijan, as well as engaging in a war against Ukraine at the same time. Their troops are stretched too thin. And because of that, the Azerbaijani government has been more aggressive in the blockade on Nagorno-Karabakh. They've been more aggressive in Armenia proper. And this has even led to FSB agents being bombed. So it's not only that Vladimir Putin has planned out multiple invasions of different countries and has been very open about his ambitions recently with, for example, the 2022 speech, but by the time that she wrote this article, Vladimir Putin's warmongering record was still there. I'm not even talking about in Syria and the Russian air campaign against hospitals and civilians as he backed up the bloodthirsty dictator Bashar al-Assad, whose repression of his people kicked off the Syrian civil war. Anyway, let's continue. Oh, I think there was the other part. Maybe it is because he speaks reasonably is the other part. We're only a paragraph in. Ah, man, Tara Reade, she's something special, isn't she? Maybe it's because he speaks reasonably with emotional intelligence at diplomatic meetings. At the launch of the invasion, one of the reasons he brought up to justify the invasion when he was making this speech, an hour-long speech that was the prelude to hundreds of thousands of people being injured and dying and a horrible tragedy that is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He was talking about J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter and transphobe and how she got canceled. His speech, while it did give somewhat of a preview of the type of Russian nationalism, the denial of Ukrainian existence that led him to invade Ukraine in large part, but it was also just a shitty, boring speech. I never thought Vladimir Putin was a particularly good speaker. Anyway, let's continue. In college, I discovered other people who were open-minded and curious about the world like me. I never thought the whole America is fighting for democracy all over the world byline. In fact, after reading authors like Noam Chomsky, my eyes opened to the great extent of our nation's hypocrisy and imperialism. After college, I worked for the Congress, then the Senate, and the California State Senate. I also worked as a political operative for a congressional race and key judge races. None of this, by the way, and I'm saying this as someone who would also not use my my time working on the local level to like claim deep knowledge of the international American empire or whatever. None of this is really directly related in like really any way to being deeply involved in our foreign policy. Like the most I could imagine is that she overhears other people while working about foreign policy, or she takes a document and hands it to somebody else on the issue of foreign policy. Especially not for the like judge races and stuff like that. All this experience opened my eyes to see America as it is, not a democracy at all, no democracy in America, but a corporate autocracy. Okay, so I have problems with America and how corporate influence has hurt our country, but every single democracy in the world has that problem to some extent. There is no pure democracy in the world without the interests of special interest groups affecting how the system works. And I could give more clear examples as a divide that is separate from America. For example, in Myanmar, when they brought about their quote unquote democracy, the military kept 25% of the seats. Is that a democracy? Well, it's a partial democracy, but it's not a full democracy. And if we're going to call that a partial democracy or say that's part of the process of democratization, right? I do think it is not too far to say that America is a democracy. You can have negative interest groups and people like financing like negative stuff in the United States and even levels of corruption with it still being a democracy, a flawed democracy, but it's still a democracy. Anyway, also, it's really weird to hear this complaint about America not being a democracy before then saying you're a liberal, meaning you care about democracy, who loves Vladimir Putin, someone who has zero respect for democracy. In other words, corporations run America, in part. So all this background is why I had a wide open mind, unfettered by American and anti-Russian propaganda, to actually appreciate Russia. Now let's talk about Vladimir Putin. So all the issues that she just brought up, everything, every single thing when it comes to corporate autocracy, all of it, it's 10 to 20 times worse in the Russian state. And I'm not trying to, just say, oh, Russia's evil, Russia's terrible in every way. But when it comes to issues of corruption and corporations, and specifically oligarchs controlling the state, that is how Russia functions. Oligarchs have deep control of the country. Russia's presidential power base, the power base around Putin, is held up by oligarchs, his allies in the business community, who are wildly corrupt and take advantage of their position close to Putin in order to advance their personal corruption, which Putin has to let happen if he wants to keep his power base in the country. When it comes to like a corporate autocracy, like Russia is a better example of this than in the United States. Even to the point where the American public cannot even elect somewhere, like in the United States, an American public can choose who goes in and out of office, and you can not get arrested during election season for condemning the current president of the United States. In Russia, there's a lot more of a blurry line there, especially when it comes to condemning the president of the United States or even condemning the war. During the invasion of Iraq, we went onto the streets and we protested against the invasion of Iraq. Well, I was like 3, so I can't say I did that, but many people did. They weren't arrested and locked up for doing that. Obviously, we still invaded Iraq and it was horrible, but there was democratic pushback on that. You can't even do that in Russia. There is no way for you domestically to show opposition to the war in a legal sense. So I'm not saying that America's perfect. America has a lot of problems. After 9/11, we violated the Constitution to spy on Muslims. We shouldn't have invaded Iraq in the first place. It was a war built on lies, pushed by monsters like Dick Cheney. But to say that you recognized America as an evil corporate-controlled autocracy so you can see the truth about Russia, all the negative things you talked about in America are issues that Russia are dealing with 5 to 10 times more. These are issues that are gigantic in Russia. And Vladimir Putin is stopping progress on these issues. Let's continue. Through my lens, President Putin brought a chaotic and failed nation to become a vibrant, creative economic force within a decade. I don't care about your politics. Just admit that his sheer calculated vision and willful energy brought Russia back to be a world power. Okay, first off, none of this has to do with liberalism. I don't know why she said me a liberal Democrat. None of this is liberalism. This is all just populism and like nationalism. That's what it just feels like. I don't care your politics. Just admit that his sheer calculated vision and willful energy brought Russia to be a world power. It became vibrant, creative economic force within a decade. It's kind of hard to be super creative if you're locking up people for wearing yellow and blue jackets. It's kind of hard to be vibrant and an economic force if you're shutting yourself off from the rest of the world in an attempt to engage in a blood and soil type conquest of another country in Ukraine. Like all of this is just, this article was bad when it was written, but every single thing she says in this article becomes 10 times worse now reflecting on the invasion of Ukraine. I said this to a friend recently. She waved her glass of Merlot at me and began the anti-Russia lecture we have all come in America to memorize. A tale of spies, oligarchs. The anti-Russia lecture. There are oligarchs in Russia. What do you mean anti-Russia lecture? It's true. That's just true. Rigged elections and murder. They murder people. Yes, the Russian government has been engaged in political assassinations. That's absolutely true. There's even accusations that they did it in Ukraine specifically. Anyway, continuing. I start to drift. I listen to the Sade song playlist playing in the background. The sweetest taboo as she speaks. When she finishes, I say, well, he is very good to women, holds them in high regard. She starts to protest and stops and say, yes, but. She trails off, no doubt thinking of the American president's obvious disdain and objectification of all women. I shrug. Maybe America's on the wrong side of some very big issues, and we need to look at our own actions. For example, Yemen or Afghanistan. It used to be fashionable as a Democrat to embrace our Russian sisters and brothers. Now it is supposed to be only Republican territory. This is ironic since the whole American anti-Russian propaganda came largely from neoconservative hawks. Okay, so first off, Vladimir Putin is historically bad on women. He's specifically in line with the Russian Orthodox Church, which is tied directly, very deeply with the Russian government, put forward its view that when it comes to domestic violence, that's not really the issue of the state. It only becomes an issue after they've really like struck them a bunch of times and they've beaten them real bad, like near death or straight up killed them. And a lot of times, because of the restrictions placed upon the response that cops can have to these types of domestic violence scenarios, the only time a lot of times they do intervene is when women are beaten to death. For example, I believe under current legislation, which many people just have been a lot more blunt than me, just saying it basically legalized much, if not almost the entirety of domestic violence. You can strike your wife once and the cops really can't do much. But if you strike her multiple times, then maybe the cops get involved. That type of shit is obscene. The type of, imagine like somebody goes up to a wife, just cold clocks her in the face. There's not really much the cops can do. You guys can go do the research on this on yourself, but all of this legislation, a lot of this stuff around women was already in effect by the time Tara Reade wrote this article. This, to me, this just comes with like a tremendous lack of research, a tremendous lack of effort. It almost feels like she just watched Vladimir Putin specifically just say, oh yeah, I like women. Women are cool. I respect them, unlike the Western dogs. And then she just took it at face value. There have been many American administration changes. President Putin has tried again and again to keep diplomatic ties strong. I'm sure President Putin has experienced political whiplash with the mercurial American diplomatic meetings. But then he is against an American machine that is more than one politician. It is American political landmine full of traps set up before he even came to power. The agenda was clear, concise, and evident when I worked in Washington, D.C. Keep the Russians talking, but bring their nation down, and no world seat for them at the table. Politics has always been a blood sport. Let me read this again. But then he is against an American machine that is more than one politician. Is she saying that, like, is that like a benefit of the Russian system, like having this one central powerful authority? Okay, whatever. I'm not even going to read too much into it. Let's just keep going. I don't want to assume her intentions. President Putin's genius is his judo ability to conserve his own energy and let the opponents flail, using up their energy while he gains position. Every single thing he said, the judo ability of marching on Kiev in a 40-mile-long convoy, getting them ambushed the entire way, drone strikes only to pull out a month later with zero discernible achievements from marching on Kiev, VDV landings that get torn to shreds. Look, the judo ability of having your soldiers march directly into minefields and get torn apart by machine guns. The judo ability of recruiting prisoners to engage in human wave attacks and Bakhmut in an effort to get a political victory, if not while not a larger strategic victory, to rally some support at home. Really brilliant judo ability here. The judo ability of running out of fuel a week into your invasion. And the thing is, when I say running out of fuel, obviously Russia still has fuel, but they couldn't transport the fuel to where the units were moving in. They thought the war would be over very quickly. They weren't prepared for a long invasion. Something about judo and martial arts and boxing. Look, I'm not super big in the martial arts. I boxed for a bit in high school, a very small period of time. But one thing I do know is that you need to be prepared for whatever the enemy throws at you. And not being prepared to fight longer than a week is not, I think, a judo mindset. Currently, President Putin has a higher approval rating in America than the American president. Let's check back up on that. By the way, what poll does she... There's not like a link here or anything. I'm curious what poll she cites, but I would also be interested in checking back up on that, as she's already now defected to Russia, particularly with women. President Putin has an alluring combination. President Putin, also, particularly with women, was there a poll done specifically on the gender divide on Vladimir Putin? Okay, now I don't think I even buy the poll. What does that even mean? There was like so we asked men and women their views of Vladimir Putin. Anyway, continuing. President Putin has an alluring combination of strength with gentleness. His sensacious image projects his love for life, the embodiment of grace while facing adversity. It is evident that he loves his country, his people, and his job. Although his job may seem like, in the words of writer Elizabeth Gilbert on Genius, trying to swallow the sun. There's a whole lot to deal with for one mere mortal. Mere mortal. President Putin's obvious reverence for women, children, and animals, and his ability with sports is intoxicating to American women, especially since the bloated American president is so negative, denigrating, and dismissive of anyone but himself as he stumbles even playing golf, which is not a real sport anyway, but a pastime. Sorry, golfers. President Putin's obvious reverence for women, children, and animals has his ability with sports is intoxicating to American women. Tara Reade, 2018. This is just fan fiction. This is what about this is about liberalism? The title of it why a liberal supports Putin. None of this has to do with liberal values. None of this has maybe like I don't know, it should be like, oh, well, I believe in freedom of trade, and like none of this has to do with any of that. It's all Putin is good at sports. Putin likes kids. Putin likes animals. Putin likes women. Putin is strong. Putin is intoxicating. It just sounds like she wants to get boinked by Putin. Maybe that's really why she went to Russia. Maybe she fled to Russia not because she's in actual danger, but because she wants to get boinked by Putin. That's what it sounds like from reading this. Like if somebody else wrote an article about Trump and it was like the intoxicating physical prowess of Donald Trump, I would assume they want to get doinked by the former president. That's what I would assume. It sounds like she wants to get doinked. This just feels like doinked fan fiction. Anyway, let's continue to the last two paragraphs. I feel like we've gotten through the majority of this horror show. President Putin has taken his nation and his people towards new horizons of developing prosperity with education, science, technology, and innovation. The scientific development in Russia has been permanently stunted by the amount of scientists that have fled the country after the Russian invasion. And the science field of Russia was already not too good. The technological field, same issue. The educational field, same issue. Infrastructure problems, deeply rooted. When we talk about the amount of corruption that happens when an infrastructure project in Russia goes down, it is absolutely obscene the amount of under-the-table kickback nonsense that is going on. I have no clue where she's getting this from. She doesn't cite anything like, hey, here's a show that actually there's a lot more tech startups in Russia now, or here's an example of like the Russian education system doing fantastic now. Like none of this. Like this, it's just like just vague claims that Putin has fixed everything. While in America, news of more job loss, punishing tariffs, and ignorant environmental policies abound. By the way, can I just say the economy of California is larger than the economy of Russia. That should not be the case. While in America, news of more job loss, punishing tariffs, and ignorant environmental policies abound. Sanctions mount and scandals alight the media. We will see if President Putin will even bother to give another thumbs up to the American president at the G20. Personally, I hope for no thumbs up, since neither the American president nor his wife deserve any positive approval from anyone.
Burns is an
immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man. Besides, frankly, my dear, President Putin does not need America anymore, and neither does Russia. Wow, it doesn't? Well, then who cares about sanctions? I mean, she seemed very angry about all the sanctions and all the aggressive actions of the United States. If Russia does not need America anymore, why does it care about sanctions? Why does it care to do business in the United States? Why does Russia invest so much in disinformation in the United States and misinformation through things like the Internet Research Agency and having books that are mandatory for the Russian officer corps to read about causing dissent in America, about trying to invest in internal strife within the United States because they believe that one of the best ways to take America down is within. Why is Russia making these investments if they don't care about America and they don't need it? Anyway, this is a silly article. Tara Reade is a joke. This is just fan fiction, trying to tout itself as political analysis. It has nothing to do with liberal democracy. It's just a fanfic. She might as well have just written this on Wattpad instead of Medium.